Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is your host, Christopher Corey with Shadow's Tech Plan. Wanted to go over VM host and hypervisors and what options there are and what I decided to go with and why. So recently I had the opportunity to basically redo my home lab infrastructure. I was running two unraid servers, one in use and one not in use. I have basically since then went ahead and taken my main server and killed off the backup server, added all the storage to that server, giving me about 100 terabytes of storage in my unraid. Basically it's pure storage and media, and then any containers that are on there are basically related to Plex, server monitoring using Grafana, and also media download automation, which I already had previous videos on, which you can go check out. And then I took my second unraid server and turned that into a full-blown VM host. That way I'm able to have a virtual lab again and have my compute basically over there so I can play, take things down, learn technologies, set up whatever basically I want, and not have to worry about messing with my unraid server since that is in full-time production in my home. So with that being said, I mean, there's a couple versions out there. Obviously, depending on your situation, your mileage will vary. I would only consider there's probably 3 or 4 options out there. Obviously, there's other ones that I may possibly miss. Everyone has their opinion of what's better. Each of them have their pros and cons. With those options being said, basically the options that you have, which would be Hyper-V, which is basically the Windows version of hypervisor. The only stipulation with that is there's a couple ways to install it. With Hyper-V, you are using Windows as a host. If you're using like Server 2012 or above, or possibly even Windows 10, which does have Hyper-V built in, even though it's kind of crappy if you ask me, but that's just my opinion. Obviously, your mileage will vary. And then, of course, with the server operating systems from Windows, you can do Core, which is basically no GUI, so it's kind of like Linux in a way. So it's kind of no GUI based, so command line, CLI, things of that nature, meaning that it's going to be a lot tighter and there won't be as many resources that are needed. And then, of course, the next option, which is more well known and more of a industry standard, is VMware's version, which is ESXi. However, there's pros and cons with that. Obviously, that's more enterprise level. Obviously, you can have Windows Hyper-V if you're like a Windows host or data center that it isn't using Linux. Obviously, you can go that route. ESXi, of course, you know, it's definitely a pretty big one out there. It's used in the industry quite a bit. However, one of the problems you're going to run into is the subscriptions are quite expensive if you're going to go for a paid legal subscription and not pirate the license, which I don't condone, obviously, nor will I go over how or if you can even do that at this point in time, but I digress. One of the cons that you will find with ESXi is the limited functions in the free version, unless you have a subscription, which is definitely quite expensive, or you're getting the subscription like if you're an IT professional and you're able to get a subscription through license through your work or something of that nature. That's obviously a option at that point in time. If you do have that option, obviously more power to you, and obviously ESXi is extremely powerful. However, one of the things that I do find as a con to ESXi, besides the licensing, if you want the full functionality and you need some of the full functionality from some of the full paid features, the newer versions of ESXi are starting to cut off support for some of the older hardware. So if you're like someone of my nature, yes, I'm running a dual Xeon setup, but they're only version 1s, so they're obviously fairly old. Granted, they do create a lot of power, but they are also extreme workhorses. I'm not sure if they're supported in the newer versions of ESXi. I honestly didn't look that up myself, but from what I'm reading, the list of what's being knocked off is starting to get pretty lengthy, and sometimes it may or may not even install due to the fact that it doesn't support your processors. That is something, if you do want to get into ESXi and the version that you were currently, if you're trying to use one of the newer versions, you'll need to look that up in the hardware compatibility list to see if yours are listed. I have heard hit or miss on some of the Dell servers, things of that nature, so again, just look that up and then you can go that way. Another one you can do, which is used a lot in the medical field, which is Zen server. Nothing against it. I haven't used it a lot myself. Granted, I have used quite a few of them. I've used Hyper-V, I've used ESXi. Another version that I'm not going to talk about a huge amount today is you can go Linux and go like KVM of that nature and then build out that way. But going that route, you have to have a little bit more knowledge. It's not as much click through and install. Like some people, they just don't have the experience of the knowledge. If you do, great. Not saying you can't use it, just a little bit more of a learning curve. And then, of course, the last option that I decided to go with and I have used in the past is Proxmox, which is another open source version you can use. It's completely free. And one of the things that I like it, I've used it a lot in the past. The newer version is nice. However, it's a little bit more convoluted if you ask me in finding some of the things, especially if you haven't used it in a long time, because it does kind of bury where things are. However, I do like the fact that, being the fact that it is open source and it is free, that there's a lot of features that you can get with it. Like, for example, you can do HA, which stands for high ability, so you can go ahead and do, let's say, a 2-node. So you could have 2 different workstations, 2 different physical servers as a Proxmox VM host, and you can migrate and move VMs in between both of those hosts. For example, if you need to do an upgrade or troubleshooting, or if you just basically want to get into high availability, so you can say, you know, hey, I ran this at home, I know how it works, and kind of get your hands wet and you know, kind of get into the deep end a little bit. Because if you are wanting to go into server administration like I am myself, you will definitely need to be able to do high availability for switching, servers, compute, storage, things of that nature. So definitely a feature that I like and something that I will probably be doing myself. I have taken my second unraid server and I've made it a Proxmox host. So currently at this point it's using an asrocck asus motherboard, and it does have dual E5 2620 version 1 Xeon CPUs, which are 6-core 12-thread apiece. Granted, they are version 1, so they're only like 2 gigahertz, which is a little bit lower. Obviously, with being the fact of COVID, unfortunately I've been affected from that. I'm not able to move away from that because that is an older platform and it is quite power hungry. At some point in time, when I am better off, I will probably be going to Ryzen, because that way I only have 1 CPU compared to 2 to get the power I need, and also a lot less power consumption, and you get greater performance and also speed in gigahertz right at the clock speed right out the gate from the CPUs. But I digress from that. At this point in time, it's running 112 gigs of RAM on this server. It would have been 128 gigs, but I did have 2 sticks die on me at one point in time, which kind of sucks, but you know, that is basically what it is at this point in time. I do have several VMs that are set up. Some of them are in production, some of them are just testing and evaluating for future projects, or if I do want to use them. I will not be going into them in depth in this video. I was just going to briefly show you what I'm using at this point in time, what's on there, and kind of what I'm playing with. I've got roughly 11 VMs set up. Some of them are going to be production full-time. Some of them, like I said, are just evaluation or when I do want to play with them. The first being Windows 10. That I have for 2 reasons. That is going to be running a Windows 10 2004 version, which is the newest Windows 10 release at this point in time. And that has 2 things on there, one being Windows Admin Center, which I'm playing with, but I'm having some problems getting connections to work. I don't know if it's firewall. I need to research that. I just haven't taken the time. And then the second one, I am messing with the free Spicework tools, which are really, really cool and neat. There's quite a bit you can get from that. You can do anywhere from excuse me, anywhere from a help desk setup to if you wanted to do like a ticketing system. If you wanted to get more experience with that, especially if you've never done help desk before and you would like to, you can get your feet wet. Spiceworks does have a pretty decent ticketing system. Obviously, it's not the best for being free. It gets you kind of your feet in the door, and you can kind of get experience and get used to what you'd be doing in a real-world scenario. I am using some of their other tools, like for inventory and network monitoring, things of that nature. I'm kind of setting up. Server 2012, that I had a couple things that I was looking at. I was going to do Veeam Community Center, which you can back up to 10 VMs with. I believe, don't hold me to that, that may have changed. You will want to look that up yourself. It is free. Once you sign up for an account, you can get a download. That will probably end up being remote access and then some other fun things that I may possibly mess with. And then I have Ubuntu VM, which is Ubuntu 20, which is the latest at this point. And that is running my photo management software as a backup in case unraid ever does go down. I can have access to that. Kane is kind of neat. It's some data forensics if you wanted to play with and kind of get familiar with. A really cool software that I will actually be doing a video on, which is extremely interesting. It's called Alien Vault, which is basically a security OSSIM. Basically, it's real-time threat assessments for various viruses, security threats, cryptocurrency, all sorts of cool stuff. There's a threat exchange. It'll do real-time assessment of what's going on, DDoS attacks, things of that nature. It's really, really cool and interesting. I definitely highly recommend looking that up. I will have another video that I will be doing at some point in time on that. And then I have my Bookstack, which is a backup of my wiki, which I run internally for all my internal note-taking. Oh, excuse me, this Ubuntu is Pi-hole, which is my backup Pi-hole forwarded in PMAT through pfSense, and then this is my photo management VM. I did load an Android VM just to kind of play with because that's kind of neat. Zabbix, I'm trying to get the appliance to work, but it's not booting correctly. I was trying to go through and use their virtual appliance, which basically has everything installed and configured, so you can just get it up and running, install, and then do your configurations for whatever you want, but I'm having problems. I ended up going with Server 2019 for Veeam Community Center, because one of the problems you run into is the newest edition of Veeam Community Center to install requires framework 4.7.2, and that is not installed with 2012. That's using 3.5, and one of the requirements for 4.7.2 framework is it needs KB 3.5.5, which that is a problematic and a double of a KB because it's really hard to install the prerequisite. But you can find the download for Windows 8 and 8.1, but you're not able to get the correct one for Server 2012, and it's really buggy to install. It's just a pain in the ass. So I went with Server 2019 evaluation version, and that has framework 4.7 already installed, so I was able to go through and get that taken care of. I have already installed Observian appliance, so it was already installed and configured, so I didn't have to go through and do the Ubuntu install. And that is for doing internal monitoring, so you can set up alerts through like SNMP and other various things of that nature to do network and resource monitoring. I just haven't installed. It's kind of a placeholder. I haven't really had the time to sit down and configure that at this point in time. And then I am running a virtual FreeNAS, which once I can get my drives upgraded in my offsite server, I will have a couple 4 terabyte drives that I will be passing through the HVA, the host bus adapter, with those drives plugged into it. That way I can get somewhere between 4 to 8 terabytes of space that I can play with in FreeNAS, so I can evaluate that and do some things that I want to internally. And at some point in time at unraid, we'll probably be moving over to FreeNAS once I run out of the storage in there, which is about 100 terabytes. Now, one of the cool things that I also do like about Proxmox is it's really easy to maintain. Like I said, if you haven't used it for a while, the menus have changed quite dramatically, so things are not exactly where they used to be. It's kind of hidden a little bit more, which is kind of stupid in my opinion. But again, it's just once you get used to it, you're able to kind of move around quite a bit more. Without the subscription, you don't get as many as the updates and things of that nature, but that won't really affect you when it comes to production and things of that nature. One of the things that I also do have set up as well is you can go through and you can back up your virtual machines, which I do have a share set up with the backups of those virtual machines. Basically just a hard disk are backed up. Apologize about that. And then they are backed up onto my unraid, which has a Proxmox share set up for that to do automatic backups, which is really nice. So if you ever have to do a restore of Proxmox, all you have to do basically is reinstall. And then after you reinstall, you set up a fake VM, set up the fake hard disk, and then basically inside of the hard disk itself, you just say restore from the restore point, and it's pretty nice. So overall, from the summary, I'm only using one node, so if you had 2-node cluster, it would show both of them are online. I'm only running one at this point in time. I might at some point go to 2 because I do kind of want to mess with HA, high availability. Currently, right now, I am running 2 8 terabyte Western Digital White hard drives in RAID 0, which is temporary until I have some SSDs that are on the way, which will be replacing that because I am using those drives for additional storage in my backup server. So you can see I've got my unraid set up here with my backups. And then under local, this is where you would go basically to fetch any of the ISO installers that you have for basically whatever it is that you want to play with. And then you can just hit upload it, or if you have to do a massive amount of uploads, then you can use something like FileZilla or something of that nature, whatever basically is your favorite option at that point in time. Storage, I've got my unraid directory through Samba Shares, which does all of my backups. Storage, it breaks it up into a couple different things when you install a couple partitions. So storage, and then local ZFS, which is local ZFS is going to be basically where unraid itself installs under, depending on what it is that you set for your install, which mine was a RAID 0. I'll probably be doing either a RAID 0 or ZFS RAID 1, which is basically the equivalent of a RAID Z1, which is basically a one failover. So it stripes to all drives. Then you can set up pools. This is where high availability if you were to have more than one node. And then I do need to do some network binding and things of that nature. I just haven't had time to get into that. Like I said, this is just kind of a really brief overview. It's really good product. It's free. There's a big community behind it. There's a lot of features you can use. Definitely something I recommend if you just kind of want to get your feet wet and you don't want to have to worry about licensing and anything of that nature compared to some of the other alternatives. And then obviously you could go Hyper-V, but if you were to do that, then you would be needing additional resources because you have to have Windows installed, whether it's Windows 10 server or if you're doing server core, which is no GUI. So, I mean, obviously there's other options. This is just what I chose at this point in time, and I'm kind of going with that. Running 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 VMs. Obviously nothing's really hardcore because I haven't got everything set up at this point. I just got this installed like 4 days ago, so I'm still going through and testing and figure out what I want to have just as evaluation and what I'm actually going to run in full-time production. So got about 12 VMs, 11 to 12 VMs. I'm running, and I will be doing future videos on some of these other VMs that I'd like to get more information on, like Alien Vault and things of that nature. If you have any other questions, definitely feel free to reach out under my social media, which I will leave a link in the description, and also I will have a link to my Discord. Other than that, appreciate it. Have a good one, guys. Have a good week and weekend, and I will talk to you guys later.